Hello students, so in this video I am going to explain you about the dental anatomy of mandibular molars. And this is the mandibular first molar, which is the biggest teeth in mandibular arc. They have two broad roots for superior anchorage. So here only crown is shown, not roots. Crown is shorter cervico-occlusally than of the anterior teeth are bigger in every other dimension. The crown of the lower molar are wider mesio-distally. This is the mesiodistal dimension, this is the mesial side, and this is the distal side. And its buccolingual dimension is short. It has five cusps, two buccal cusp, two lingual cusp, and one is additional distal cusp. And it has two roots. One is the mesial root on this side, and the other is the distal root on this side. And it erupts at the age of 6. So now let's move on to the buccal aspect of the mandibular first molar. You can see the crown is roughly trapezoid. From this aspect, mesiobuccal and distobuccal cusp are flat while the distal cusp is pointed. Here is the distal cusp which is pointed, and these are the two cusps, which is the mesiobuccal cusp and the distobuccal cusp. And the distal cusp is this side. Two developmental grooves appear. You can see the developmental grooves. I'll just highlight these grooves for better appreciation. And the cervical ridge is found near the cervical line. You can see the curvature of cervical line here. Cervical line is normally regular, dipping apically toward the root bifurcation. And here the root bifurcation start. So now let's move on to the lingual aspect or the palatal aspect. You can see You can see the distal cusp here also with these two lingual cusps, and these two lingual cusps are high enough to hide the buccal cusp. When you hold it on this side, you can clearly see the length of the lingual cusps. The lingual developmental groove separates the lingual cusp. I'll highlight this groove for you. See this. Here, cervical line is irregular. You can compare the cervical line in the lingual aspect and on the buccal aspect. So let's move on to the mesial aspect of mandibular first molar. This is mesial aspect because the distal cusp is on this side. So this is one of the identification point. Here two cusps are seen, which is the mesiobuccal cusp and the mesiolingual cusp. The mesial aspect of tooth is broader and mesial cusp are higher. So you cannot see the distal cusp, which are shorter in length. So this hides away the distal cusps. Mesial marginal ridge is confluent with the mesial ridges of distal cusp. You can see the mesial marginal ridge, and contact area is in the junction of occlusal third and middle third. So let's divide the mesial aspect into three parts. This is the cervical third, this is middle third, and this is occlusal third. So contact area lies here, from which the tooth contacts with the adjacent tooth. So this is the distal aspect of mandibular first molar. You can see distal aspect is very narrow. More of the tooth can be seen from this aspect because when you hold it this way, also the mesial cusp are seen. This distobuccal cusp is seen, and also the lingual cusp are clearly visible from this aspect. And it's grossly similar to the mesial aspect. Distal cusp is the foreground from this aspect. The cervical line is usually straight. It don't have much curvature. So I'll name this aspect as D for the distal. So this is occlusal aspect of mandibular first molar, which is roughly hexagonal in shape, and it is wider mesiodistally. As this is the mesial aspect, You can see the mesial half, this is broader, and the distal half is narrower, and it converges on the distal side. The buccolingual measurement, this is the buccal and this is the lingual side. So this is the buccolingual measurement of mesial portion is bigger than on the distal portion, which is narrower. So the occlusal aspect of mandibular molar is thrown into so many cusps and depressions such as grooves. So the cusp here is the mesio-buccal cusp because this is on the mesial side and this is the buccal aspect. So this is the mesio-buccal cusp. This is the distobuccal cusp because this is on the distal side and the aspect is buccal. This is the distal cusp and these two are the lingual cusp. This is mesiolingual cusp and this is distolingual cusp. So the largest cusp is the mesiobuccal cusp, which is followed by the two lingual cusp, and then the distobuccal cusp, and the smallest being the distal cusp. So this was about the cusp. So the largest one is mesiobuccal, then comes the two lingual, then the distobuccal cusp, and the smallest is the distal cusp. And there are two ridges. This is the distal marginal ridge, and this is the mesial marginal ridge. And the grooves here are the central groove, which is marked with pencil. You can see it runs in the central portion of the occlusal aspect from mesial side to the distal side. Here is the mesial fossa, mesial triangular fossa. It starts here and it ends on the distal triangular fossa. So here the central developmental groove is well marked. You can see the wax is filled here in the central developmental groove. So as we move further, I'll talk to you about the mesiobuccal developmental groove. So you can see the mesiobuccal developmental groove here, which I have marked from this blue pencil. This is on the mesial side and runs on the buccal aspect. So this is named as mesiobuccal developmental groove, which originates from the central groove. Then comes the distobuccal groove. This is on the distal side, which also runs on the buccal aspect and originates from central groove. So it is named as distobuccal developmental groove. And then the lingual developmental groove. This is totally on the lingual aspect. It divides the lingual part of occlusal third into half. So it originates from the central portion and runs on the lingual aspect. So this was all about the grooves. Now let's talk about the fossas. So there are three fossas. One is the central fossa, which is on this side, which is a depression like fossa. This is on the central groove, on the center part. So it is called as central fossa. Then comes the distal fossa, distal triangular fossa. So this is a triangular part, and here is the distal triangular fossa. Similarly, on the mesial side, this is the mesial triangular fossa. Now let's talk about the pits. So followed by the fossas, there are pits. So this depression is a pit. Also, this depression is a pit. This is called as mesial pit. This is the distal pit, and this depression on the central side is also called as central pit.